Hello and welcome to this edition of EMSNOW Up Close. I'm Eric Miskell with EMSNOW, and it is my pleasure today to be speaking with Mark Rinehart. Mark is the founder and managing director of Horse Laboratories. We've spoken to Mark before, and actually I had the pleasure of shaking your hand and meeting you in person at Electronica a few weeks ago. So that was cool. So
yeah, the pleasure is mine. It's been good to meet in person. And I think that was one of the resounding things about electronica. It was just the relief of being able to make human contact with people again. That was a very special time a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, no. By the way, how was the show for you guys?
It was busy. We were expecting to be busy I think there was a lot of pent up need for interaction. And that really kind of came out. Unfortunately, with the travel restrictions, there wasn't a large contingent from Asia, which is usually there is. But by and large, it was a very, very strong show. I think the contacts and the leads that were there were very, very strong. There was a lot of genuine interest in the industry overall, and how can we do things better? I think as a company, we got to talk to clients directly and got feedback that way. But I think just overall industry wise, there was a lot of open communication. I think a lot of it getting kind of pent up and then kind of pouring out. But it was very, very strong in terms of just the show itself, in terms of number of people, the quality of leads, I think the communication, the conversations. It was very special.
Yeah, no, it was very active. It was good to be there. Listen, I wanted to just start talk about your business, and then we can talk about the industry in which you operate. So let's kind of start. A lot has happened since I spoke to you last for Horse Laboratories, I think. You've done some expansion. I was actually on your website earlier. You have a great timeline dating back to 2004 when you were founded, and how you moved forward. I think when I met you, you just had Hong Kong and Shenzhen, and Munich had been opened. But now you've expanded even more since then. Tell us about what's happening there.
Yep. It's been a dynamic year on that regard, and actually the year prior setting things up. Now we've opened the full lab facilities in Singapore and in the United States in the last, this year, kind of around July is when we really started getting the equipment in place. We've been training staff in both facilities since March. So we got both those facilities open here kind of around the July, August timeframe. The Singapore facility, Singapore is kind of like Hong Kong in that it's still a vital hub. It's small, but it's a vital hub for the industry around it in Southeast Asia, like Hong Kong is for China. Singapore is kind of a lot of R&D. So we see a lot of really fast turn requirement, like small sample size, fast turn needs for prototype building. And then the U.S. facility is a much larger facility. So we've got 24 full-time staff there, and it's about 800 square meters, 900 square meters. So both facilities are fully equipped for AS1681 A1 through A6, if you're familiar with the protocol, plus electrical testing. U.S. is in its phase 1, so we're going to add some more capabilities to the U.S. for manufacturing support. We got both those facilities open. I think with the travel restrictions, this has been on the agenda for some time. And we just couldn't get our need to train. Hands-on training is so vital, and we just couldn't get anybody here to train. And finally, we just went, all right, well, there's a will, there's a way, and just kind of pulled the plug and went for it. So all right, we're going to have to do it remotely. And then we were able to get some guys to our Singapore facility, and we learned a whole lot. Over the last 3 years, all of us have learned to communicate more effectively remotely. How that translated to hands-on training was a fun dynamic to work with. Somewhat sarcastic, but not entirely. We really learned how to do that well, and to get our engineers here working and seeing the same thing real time that our technicians in the remote sites are doing. So ultimately, it really rolled out very well, our ability to train without the ability to travel. So very exciting action for both those locations.
Yeah. How was it actually, with finding qualified staff or finding staff in general for your facilities? Was that a challenge?
Not as much as we expected, to be fair. I really was. I was looking at hearing the news and looking at kind of the recruiting activity in the U.S. And I'm just like, this could be an uphill struggle. But knock on wood, I mean, it's something we've always been strong at is retention. So I think we do something right in terms of the team building. I think that portrayed through the way that we were communicating with the team as we built it, and we built the team quite quickly in the U.S. We got it's a very strong team. We got IPC, not just trained, but we got IPC certified and IPC masters on the team. There, we've got guys that are very strong background from the industry with in terms of an EMS background, so they come from PCBA. So very very strong. Part of I think we got I'd say lucky, but it's something that might be partly by plan. Is that when we pick a location, a team for us is always first. When we look at a facility, it's like, all right, is this where we're going to be comfortable? I mean, is the team going to be comfortable coming to work and being here every day? So from the location and the facility itself is all part of the outlook in terms of are we building a place where people want to be?
Mhm.
So I think all those factors come in. We made some adjustments, like the fuel prices were high, so we made some adjustments for mileage allowance for people that were commuting a little further. So I think we did some of the things right that were necessary, but also maintaining that team focus and kind of a family atmosphere. And it was attractive enough, and I think we were able to do a very good job of building a team in the U.S., which is I think we should. Aaron, our GM, there should be very proud of what he's accomplished in building that team.
Oh, excellent.
Singapore has been a little bit more of a struggle. It's a smaller, much smaller community. And they've been very strong. They've got a lot of spillover from some Hong Kong and things. So recruiting in Singapore has been a little bit harder in the U.S. But again, the team that we have is extremely good, and it's a very solid foundation to continue building on.
Okay. And speak about and I should have done this at the base, speak to the services that you're offering and which of those are being offered at the new foot within the new footprint.
Okay. The Obviously with the market conditions the last 3 years, I mean the shortage situation's been literally front page news. So the need for product testing and counterfeit detection, counterfeit and substandard detection is certainly part of our profile. It's probably what we're known for most, and it's been the largest section of our business really the last couple of years. But we also do failure analysis and life cycle and reliability testing. Not just component level, but PCBA and PCB. We do logistics services and programming and high-speed taping, really manufacturing support. Like anything a factory needs to be able to go from dock to stock, receive it and get in operation is what we try to cover. Obviously, it's all built around the lab, but the like packaging and logistics service are complementary to that, but it's part of the profile. So the U.S. facility is both Singapore and the U.S. open with counterfeit and substandard detection. AS6081 is the most common standard within that framework. So both facilities are fully capable of the whole AS6081 protocol, the required A1 through A6 levels plus electrical testing. The U.S. can do temperature range. Again, we work with a lot of high rel industries for aerospace and automotive and medical. So testing at temperature range and extended life cycles is pretty important. So that's currently in place in the U.S. And then phases 2 and 3, we're going to add failure analysis and life cycle and reliability testing into the U.S. facility.
Okay. Now you do, I saw there too, one of the services also auditing.
Yeah, factory auditing. We've been working with more clients probably over the last couple of years than usual, which has been healthy because again, the travel restrictions have also meant that people's QA teams cannot get to their suppliers, whether it's their own factory or contractors. They haven't been able to get there, so they need to rely on third parties, whether it's us or somebody else, to get into those factories and make sure things are being produced correctly, particularly like from mature products to new products coming online. Hard to do an NPI without eyes on. So we've been pretty active on that side. It's kind of region wide as well. Like throughout China, the manufacturing areas have extended beyond the major cities years ago into some of the remote areas. So yeah, we've stayed busy in that regard.
Okay. Now, the client base that you serve, I know there's a lot of top EMS companies that do that, but is it mostly on the EMS side? You also engage with the OEMs. Where's the customer base that's driving the business?
It's a good question. And sometimes it's a little difficult for us to track because the requirement tends to be pushed to the supplier. The person supplying the product has got to verify that it's fit for use. Now that can be being directed by the OEM. And I think over the last few years in particular, we've heard talk of, I know Phil has mentioned as well, the zero trust policy.
Yeah.
that there's a lot more activity being driven by the OEM and the EMS. They might, for example, the 6081 has really kind of taken root as the standard to use, and that's being pushed by the OEM to make sure that their EMS is purchasing product and populating their boards with quality product. And then that requirement then goes down to the supplier in some cases. So it's a little difficult to track. But so overall, I would say our customer base covers the entire spectrum. Globally, we work with clients around the world. That's one of the reasons, again, we've expanded into those other facilities to be able to service them better. But I'd say it's pretty equally distributed between the OEM driving the EMS who drives their supplier, and their supplier is proactive about wanting good quality products. So it kind of comes from everywhere, which is a healthy consequence of people being more conscious of supply chain risks.
Yeah. And you kind of teased where I was getting at with that, which is, what was the business that drove the expansion into it's Cleveland in the United States, and then into Singapore, and you have India as well, but that there's not a lab there per se, right?
Yeah. We have an office in Bangalore, and our client base is very strong. Our team in India that's working with the OEM base is extremely strong and very well connected and respected. And just when I was in the India electronica, that's just the amount of contacts we had there was extremely strong, and at the OEM level. So India is currently a sales office that will be evolving into a test lab. And same with Munich. Munich is a sales office, and that's I'm just looking at my calendar to where are we at this week with it. So Munich's also developing, and that's been driven by a couple of factors. The expansion has been driven by the shortage market, and the need for shorter lead times. It's also been driven by kind of the regionalization of manufacturing. I wouldn't call it necessarily reshoring because it's going. There is some of that, but I'd say it's more regional. And we need to be where our customers are. We need to be where manufacturing is. Like our facility in Cleveland, we're surrounded, and I kind of call it the Big Ten framework. It's just there's industry all around. And that's where we need to be to make sure that we're taking care of what manufacturers need. Part of that reshoring process is bringing production lines from location A to location B. And those locations have to go through protocols to make sure that they're maintaining consistency. Part of the protocol is we have to do some testing to make sure that the assembly is the same quality that we were used to at the other location, make sure that that process has been duplicated. So there's a lot of support required at the manufacturing site as they regionalize and reshore, that those new production facilities are maintaining the same quality consistency as the previous one. And we have a big part to do with that.
Yeah. So safe to say then that customers that you have always serviced in the China market where you started, as you said, you're following them to these different areas as they expand and have the needs there. They're asking you to provide service for them in those regions?
Yeah, there's been a great deal of that. And there's been, maybe it's always been there, but there's been more demand there recently. And there's a couple of years ago was that conversation. Hey, you kind of talked about a U.S. facility. Is that going to be happening? Because we really need it. It's like, oh, yeah. Okay. Then, some of it was a little bit delayed by the travel restrictions until we just pulled the plug on it. Pulled the plug on, sorry, not to drain it, but to pull the anchor, I suppose is a better way of saying it. I can't wait for the travel restrictions to come down. So just get it done.
Yeah.
And certainly that's been to support the regionalization of manufacturing.
Okay, good. Now, well, let's talk about that. I mean, you mentioned the reshoring, there is some shifting, I hear mixed opinions on this. So let me get yours. You're kind of on the ground. The whole reshoring, UBS came out with a report saying that they think that it's like 20 to 30% of the manufacturing, the electronics manufacturing in China will migrate out to other areas. But then I was talking to somebody from the ECIA last week, their chief analyst, and if I look at where the major distributors are selling their product, it's primarily China. That really hasn't changed much in the last few years, right? So
no.
How do you see the migration and what's happening?
I read your article the other day on like the call to arms for North American EMS as well, which was a good read, and it was on the point. The amount of manufacturing here in China is so huge that when you talk 20 to 30% of that, it's like, who's going to be able to handle that? A couple of years ago, let's go to Vietnam. It's like, well, you saturated, I mean, you as the industry saturated Vietnam in literally fractions of a second in terms of the grand scheme of things, in terms of the population base, and they didn't even have factories to build yet. So, like, who's going to take on this manufacturing? You're talking 20 to 30% of a gigantic number. Who's going to be able to handle that? I think I would suspect that that's kind of an unrealistic number over a period of time, perhaps. Yeah, the domestic manufacturers themselves have been moving to lower cost areas, so it's not been a entirely ABC anywhere but China manufacturing movement. It's been lower cost has been driving it before it kind of became headline news. I think 20 to 30% is a gigantic number. It's going to take a lot of ramp up to do it. We were just talking about staffing. It's like, okay, if everybody's got staffing problems, where are you going to get the people to do this?
Yeah.
So India's got the population base. The U.S., I think, has the productive capacity in terms of automation and advanced manufacturing processes. Mexico is extremely strong. The articles I've been reading about manufacturing in Mexico, the EMS facilities, in terms of their technological perspective. I think 20% is a gigantic number, but I certainly see it shifting. Like reshoring might be going back to the Americas, not all to North America. We've actually seen a lot going to Canada as well.
And as you indicated, Mexico, I think, is going to be one of the great beneficiaries of that. And the image that's always invoked is it's, you know, it's like a big cruise ship. It doesn't turn on a dime, right? It's going to, it's not like a nimble little sailboat that you can just pivot and go, right? So.
And it's not only the ability, the capacity to manufacture, it's the supply chain infrastructure that's required to make it effectively. And I think one of the first episodes of EMSNOW that I watched kind of at the start of the pandemic, I think it was the CEO of Jabil. And I forgot the gentleman's name, but he was with a supply chain strategist or consultancy firm. And they were talking about that. It's like, it's the infrastructure. I think we, as a global manufacturing community, have been developing the supply chain here in China for 20 to 30 years. And it works. I mean, what you need is available. And it's not just putting up a factory. It's where's the infrastructure behind it. If you need materials or supplies or services, if they're not available, it's going to be really difficult to effectively reshore and be competitive without the supply chain there to support it. I think that's kind of part of what we work on our regionalization as well. So we're part of that cog, and we need to be where that manufacturing is going to be based.
Yeah, which is why I find it interesting, to go follow this a little bit. The CHIPS Act here in this country, the European Union has it going. And we all know, what we can do, the semiconductors here, those factories really won't be producing anything for a few years, right? That doesn't happen. But then you still need that whole supply chain to kind of migrate with it, right? So if we're going to do the chips here, but send it to Asia for packaging and for the boards and everything, what have you really accomplished? So I think the hope is really that as you're saying, that supply chain infrastructure will start migrating as well as you get that kind of crown jewel of semiconductors established.
Yeah, I think that's the basis point. You look at the raw material. What's the raw material that goes into electronics? And besides the brain power to design it, it's the semiconductors, the components that go along with it. There's also been articles about it. Right, we're going to do the PCBA in the U.S., but where are the PCBs coming from? So, I mean, have you solved your problem? No. All these wafer fabs, great. They take 5 years, 4 to 5 years for a wafer fab to come online. And if you're still doing the packaging and assembly somewhere else, have you solved your problem?
Right.
Maybe your capacity problem in terms of the wafers, but not in terms of your risk mitigation for just the regional disruptions. Unless you solve it all the way up and down the supply chain, you're still exposed.
It's funny. I did an interview last week, I think it was, with the Printed Circuit Board Association of America that's developed, and they're advocating for the reestablishment, resurrection, whatever the term is, of the PCB industry within North America. Not to go down, but they had their slogan is "Chips don't float," right? Which is the whole idea. Which I thought it really captures, your imagination. It's like, you're right, doing the chip, but it's got to go on something. And what does it go on? And their whole thing is chips don't float, and I thought that's a good way to kind of
Yeah,
capture
it is. And actually, when you do the solderability testing on a PCB, it's actually the solder float method is one of the methods to use in it. So
there you
I don't know
go.
if that was coincidental, but it's certainly clever marketing.
No,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, the supply chains are so deep and so intertwined and so complex that you can't just look at one segment of it. And even in semiconductors, we're just the news has all been about wafer fabs. Um,
yeah,
yeah, but
exactly.
like wafer doesn't do anything until you've actually packaged it into the chip itself. So
There's so
okay,
much more to. Hey, so tell me what you're seeing then in the component supply chain. Everybody's thinking 2023. It'll still kind of people are hopefully optimistic as we end 2022, thinking that maybe some of the demand is going to lessen as well. But where do you stand? What do you see?
the I think crisis mode is over. At least it's been suspended for a while. For a while, there was everything. I mean, nothing was available.
Mhm.
Um, Now it's more pocketed. We've been able to catch up in some commodity types, but like power ICs are still at very long lead times, and some of the very complex integrated circuits are still at long lead times. When people say, like, we've heard some that the shortage is over, and I was going, and why am I looking at a 73-week lead time on a part that we need to test another part? So it's not over. When Intel said it's going to take until 2023, 2024 to balance the current supply and demand. There's still going to be pockets of shortages, as there always are. There's still going to be pockets of shortages, I think, throughout 2023, large enough for it to be considered that the shortage situation isn't over, but it certainly has more stabilized. Not just in terms of the chip supply. I think the manufacturers themselves are taking a look at it and going, you know what, I think we'll wait.
Mhm.
Before they were already in a production plan, and they couldn't wait. I think there's a little bit more ability so you'd say flexibility from the OEMs saying, all right, we'll wait another 3 months for the components to be here rather than trying to go different channels to find them. So also we're seeing North America and Europe with fuel prices so high, consumer spending is down because we need to warm our homes. So we're not necessarily buying the latest gadget that's coming out. We're going to wait till spring and our fuel prices aren't so high. So there might be some pent up demand, I suspect, in March that might cause a resurgence in some of the shortages. But I think, like everybody, when there's a lull, as we have during the holiday period, this is really a time to do the planning and do the organizing that necessarily we didn't have time to do in crisis mode. So hopefully we see a little bit better planning next year too. So while the shortages might not be over, the disruption in terms of the supply chain maybe won't be as severe because we've got ways around it in terms of whether it's delaying production here or using alternatives or something.
Yeah. So have there been, if I think of your core business, which was, as you were saying, kind of the counterfeit detection and that kind of finding
Mhm.
problem parts, has that abated some too during the last year, or how's that developing?
No, I would say that probably peaked around June or July. And then we've seen a little bit of an erosion in terms of the demand over time, over the last couple months. I mean, a few percentage points every month. Some of that's cyclical. It's just part of the seasonal cyclical too. It slows down around this time of year because, generally speaking, the Christmas presents are already on the shelves, if not under the tree. And we take a bit of a break. So some of that I think is also kind of cyclical in nature, but we've seen a little bit of it slow down. But the commodity types that are still in shortage are still very, very strong in terms of demand from the secondary market or alternative sources. I mean, a lot of excess inventory. I think we've gotten much better. We as an industry has gotten better at managing excess and surplus inventories. Um,
So, you mentioned the seasonality, and it just dawns on me the season we're about to head into will be Chinese New Year's here soon, right? And,
yeah,
and all that brings with it in China there. Any teasers? I mean, I've never haven't asked anybody yet this year, so I'll ask you as a man on the ground there. Is it going to be different? Last year, I know it was hard, right? They
yeah,
tried to limit the people's ability, and we're giving them incentives to stay, right,
yeah.
not go home. But how might that be this next year?
Sorry, I was smiling as you mentioned because I was just having a conversation the other day. It's like, oh yeah, we need to start letting people know about supply, about the Chinese New Year because it changes every year. It's not like you can drop it on your calendar and it's the third Thursday of every month. It changes every year, and a lot of us aren't familiar with that. So it's in the middle of January this year, and generally it starts to slow down the week before because it takes a while to get home, and then it tends to extend for the week after. So it's really a 3 week disruption, and it starts in mid-January this year. So I was just smiling. It's like we need to be letting our customers, reminding them that that's coming up because they need to be placing orders now for stuff they need to be able to ship literally within a month from now. Otherwise, there's going to be a huge disruption coming up. There's been a lot of restrictions coming down here domestically. The ability to travel between cities is becoming it.
You mean restrictions? The way you said that, you mean restrictions coming, not that they're being passed down, but they're being removed or lessened. Is that what you mean?
Correct. The like over the course of the last 3 years, there's been pretty much a large degree of freedom to travel domestically. I'd say recently that's been a little bit restricted in terms of the concern, particularly this year from February when there was probably the largest outbreaks, which Shanghai got a lot of attention. There's been a lot of the attempt to control the spread, and you can understand as well with a population this high and as dense as that population is, it spreads. And if you talk about a disease that spreads, wow. I mean, this is like fuel and fire, fuel and breeze on a fire with this kind of population density. So while you kind of on the surface, you're like, geez, that looks extreme. It's like, yeah, when you think about it in terms of ability to spread, it's reasonable. But those have been coming down in terms of their relaxing the restrictions here, particularly within the last week or so. I think the immunizations have taken effect. The strains are a little bit weaker. Again, I'm not speaking on behalf of CDC, but it doesn't seem to be as dangerous as it was before. And the restrictions, the ability to travel is opening up a little bit more as a directly proportional to the risk perceived. Okay. So yeah, I expect that Chinese New Year here is people are going to be able to get home. So if anything, it might even be a little larger disruption kind of industry wide because maybe a lot of people didn't travel this year, and it's like I know I just visited my father for the first time in 3 years. I'm not going to miss that chance. Yeah. So I think it might be a little bit larger disruption this year because if people didn't have the chance to reconnect last year, that they're certainly going to take the opportunity to do so this year, and maybe take a little more time while they're at it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's interesting. I realized that it was in middle of January starting. So, but everybody, I just haven't heard a lot of chatter about it yet. Maybe because we're all caught up in other disruptions.
Yeah. Well, and we're caught up in like the Christmas and New Year, and we're kind of used to it being there's a break after that before Chinese New Year. That's why I kind of was like, yeah, it's almost immediately following this year. So we need to be getting the word out now for people to be planning accordingly because even a week or two from now, it's going to be too late.
Yeah. Now, do you have to plan with that with your staff and they're going home, or what impact does that have on your business? Do you think?
We're largely driven by the supply base. So if the suppliers are already off, then we aren't receiving product to test. We generally run up until the last minute. People literally on their way out of town, they drop it off with us and say we need it to ship tomorrow. Like, oh. So we tend to go to the last minute and try to get back a little early. Fortunately, a lot of our staff live here in Shenzhen. So we don't have as much of the team that travels. So we're able to kind of stay open until the last minute and reopen pretty quickly. But also with the facilities in Cleveland and Singapore, we've got flexibility, regionalization. We got ability to test in different locations. So the disruption for us won't be as large because we've got backup plans.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. You've been very generous with your time with me here. My evening, your morning. So I do appreciate that. It's good to get a business update from you. You always have I've always found and appreciated because you're kind of a man on the ground over there who sees it from a lot of perspectives with the business that you do with the various companies. So
I appreciate the time. Your perspective is more broad based than mine. I think this is a little bit myopic in terms of the area that we look at, and you have a more kind of a international perspective and not just from the component side. You see it from the EMS manufacturing side. So I appreciate the perspective that you bring as well. So it always makes our conversations lively and entertaining as well as insightful.
Well, good. Well, listen, I I wish you a happy conclusion to the year, a safe and uneventful Chinese New Year's, and hopefully we get another catch up next year and see if some of your predictions prove to be accurate.
Well, we'll see. But until then, you have a very happy holiday season, and everybody have a very happy holiday season. Happy, safe, and again, reconnect. We're able to do a little bit more in terms of globally. We're allowed to connect with people that we haven't been able to do for a while. So enjoy it.
No, it's all good. Mark, thank you very much for your time, sir. I appreciate you.
Pleasure. All right. Great talking to you.